The Seoul skyline was a circuit board of cold ambition, bleeding neon into the dusk. On the 60th floor, Park Jae-sun's world was silent but for the whisper of his fountain pen. It moved across the parchment with surgical precision, sentencing a rival shipping conglomerate to a quiet, financial death. 3 feet away, Abigail stood. Her tablet was a shield against her chestnut silk blouse, her posture perfect, her eyes missing nothing. The sandalwood incense in the penthouse couldn't mask the electric hum of the city below, or the sharper tension in the room. It vibrated between them, a violin string pulled too tight for 4 long years. Professional distance, meticulously maintained. A silent, humming note neither dared to play. Jae-sun signed his name. His dark hair fell forward, and the intricate hwacha, a fire-cart tattoo, on his neck seemed to shift with his controlled breath. His silence wasn't empty. It was a honed blade. Abigail's phone chimed. A soft, personal sound in their realm of calculated quiet. She glanced at the screen. A transformation, gentle, real, a sunrise on her features, that Jae-sun caught in his periphery. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady as granite. "I'll be leaving early tonight. The merger files are on your server." Jae-sun didn't look up. The pen continued its whispering scrape. "The briefing with the Osaka family is at 8. Reschedule it." The finality in her tone was a new dialect. She slipped the phone into her bag, a gesture like a gate closing. "I have a date by 7 p.m. The scratching stopped. The silence that followed wasn't quiet. It was the vacuum before a detonation. The air grew dense, charged. Jae-sun's shoulders, always a paradigm of control, went utterly still. For 10 eternal seconds, Park Jae-sun stopped breathing. Then, with movements so measured they seemed choreographed, he reached into his suit jacket. He extracted a slender silver case, selected a cigarette, and lit it. The flame illuminated the hard planes of his face. He hadn't smoked in 3 years. Abigail's hand was already on the elevator call button when his voice cut through the smoke-thick air, cold and sharp as a scalpel. "His name is Kim Min-woo." She froze, her finger hovering an inch from the brass. "A curator," Jae-sun continued, the clinical calm of a threat assessment in his tone. "Masters from Yale. Drives an electric Hyundai, allergic to pine nuts. He prefers Bill Evans to Miles Davis, hates Macchioli, and is currently at a table at the midnight chapter. Checking his watch because you are now," he glanced at his paycheck, 14 minutes late. Abigail turned slowly. The controlled fury in her eyes was magnificent, but Jae-sun saw the pulse hammering at the base of her throat, a tell she'd never conquered. "You're tracking me." It was an indictment. No, he took a deliberate drag, exhaling a plume of smoke that hung between them like a ghost. He rose, fluid as a panther, circling the desk. "I'm vetting him." He was close now, close enough for her to smell the tobacco mixed with his cedar and frost cologne, close enough to see the dark fire in his eyes. "Because Kim Min-woo," Jae-sun said, his voice dropping to an intimate, dangerous register, "doesn't exist." The elevator's chime was a mockery in the frozen air. The doors remained open, an empty, waiting void. But Abigail's feet were welded to the marble. Her mind, a weapon in its own right, raced through the past 2 weeks of curated texts, shared jokes about abstract art, the algorithm-perfect sync of his tastes with hers. "You're lying," she breathed, but the fracture in her voice betrayed her. The perfect man had felt like a gift. Now he felt like a trap. A humorless smile touched Jae-sun's lips. He reached into his jacket, not for another cigarette, but for his phone. A single swipe, and he extended it to her. On the screen, a digital autopsy scrolled past. IP addresses routing through proxy servers in Reykjavik, photo metadata with timestamps from a stock agency in Tallinn, a fabricated university record, a ghostly trail of ones and zeros composing a man. "A digital marionette," Jae-sun said, his voice still that unsettling calm. "Created 48 hours ago. The photos were purchased." The chat logs were scripted by a team in Manila. His entire existence is a fishing expedition with one target. Abigail's blood ran cold, but her gaze hardened into shards of obsidian. Why? The word was a blade. Jae-sun's mask slipped, just for a microsecond. Something raw and violent flickered in his eyes before it was buried under glacial control. Because someone wants you compromised, scared, or turned. He stubbed the cigarette out on the edge of his onyx desk, a permanent black scar on the flawless surface. And I don't yet know which. A brittle laugh escaped Abigail. She stepped away from the elevator, from the illusion of escape. You want to know what's actually terrifying, Jae-sun? She reached into her leather portfolio, not for her tablet, but for a slim manila folder. She threw it onto his desk. Papers fanned across the dark stone like accusation given form. Bank statements. Offshore registry documents. Transaction records spanning 4 years. All meticulously organized, all leading to one name. Abigail M. Valdez. I found your second ledger, she said, her voice shifting into the cool, interrogative tone she used to break suppliers. The one he'd taught her. The one you thought was buried. 17 million US dollars. Funneled into accounts in Cyprus, the Caymans, Dubai. Accounts in my name, with signatures that are forgeries of my hand. She took a step closer, now the predator in the dance. You haven't been protecting me. You've been framing me. Building the perfect fall girl. The foreign assistant who embezzled from the mighty Park Jae-sun and vanished. The city lights blinked on behind him, a galaxy of indifferent witnesses. The penthouse felt like a gilded cage. You think that's what this is? Jae-sun's voice was soft, but beneath it ran a current of something that sounded perilously close to pain. What else could it possibly be? Her composure cracked, just on the last word. 4 years. I've stood right here, 3 feet from your throne, learning every secret, cleaning every mess. And the whole time, you were constructing my prison. Jae-sun moved, not with anger, but with a devastating speed that left her no time to recoil. One moment he was behind the desk. The next, he was inches away, the heat of him a tangible force, the scent of smoke and cedar overwhelming. His hand came up, but didn't touch her. It hovered beside her cheek, a phantom caress. Look at the dates, Abigail, he commanded, his voice low, intimate. Look. Against her will, her eyes dropped to the scattered papers. She found the timestamps. The first transfer, the day after her probation ended. The next, a week later. A steady, monthly drip, growing larger each quarter. Those started before you had access to the vaults, he whispered. Before you knew where the real bodies were buried. Before you became the only person in this empire I don't have to watch my back from. His finger finally brushed a strand of hair from her temple. The touch was electric, infuriating. That money isn't a trap. It's an escape hatch. Your escape hatch. His touch burned like a brand. Abigail jerked her head back, but the damage was done. The shiver that raced down her spine was one of treacherous recognition, not fear. An escape hatch, she repeated, the words hollow. Her mind, reeling from the phantom date and the fabricated curator, now tried to process this new, labyrinthine truth. Jae-sun didn't retreat. He used her momentary stillness to gather the scattered papers, his movements efficient. He laid them out in a clean line on the desk, a chronological map of his 4-year conspiracy. The day you renegotiated your contract, he said, pointing to the first line, was the day I knew. You were too brilliant to be a permanent fixture in my shadow. Too good. He said the last word as if it were a flaw, a vulnerability they shared. So I began building you a bridge out of this life. He turned his tablet, showing her a portfolio that made her professional composure falter. Real estate holdings in Switzerland under a shell corporation she recognized as her mother's maiden name. Blue-chip stocks, art investments via a blind trust in Luxembourg. a cascade of assets cleanly laundered through layers of legitimacy. 17 million liquid, he stated. Another 22 in appreciating assets. Enough to vanish. To become a gallery owner in Lisbon, a venture capitalist in Singapore, a woman who never has to schedule a man's demise between his lunch and dinner appointments. Abigail stared at the numbers, the sheer scale of the secret he'd kept. You set up a trust for me. It wasn't a question. I ensured that if this empire ever crumbled, when it crumbled, you wouldn't be buried in the rubble. His dark eyes held hers, utterly unguarded for the first time. You were never the fall girl, Abigail. You were always the one who was supposed to get away. The raw sincerity in his voice was more disarming than any threat. It slipped past her defenses, a knife of truth finding a seam in her armor. Her breath hitched. Then why the lie? She whispered, gesturing vaguely toward the window, toward the ghost named Kim Minute-Woo waiting at the jazz club. Why create a fake date to frighten me? Jae-sun's expression sealed over, the vulnerability vanishing behind a wall of grim purpose. Because I'm not lying about the threat. He swiped his tablet again. The screen split, on one side, the financial portfolio, on the other, a live security feed from the midnight chapter. There was the corner table. There was the handsome, anxious man checking his watch. And there, sliding into the seat opposite him, was a woman in a severe grey suit. Abigail's blood went cold. Prosecutor Kang Seo-yun, the iron hammer of the Seoul Central District Office, who had made dismantling the Park Consortium her personal crusade. Your date isn't a curator, Jae-sun said, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He's a deep-cover investigator. And he's not after me. The camera zoomed. In the investigator's hand was a thin file. Jae-sun enhanced the image. It was Abigail's corporate ID photo, stamped with the Park Global seal. He's after the keys you hold, Jae-sun finished. And Prosecutor Kang is holding the door. The elevator chimed again, a sharp, discordant note. But this time, the doors slid open to reveal not an empty cab, but Park Minute-jun, Jae-sun's younger brother. His usually impeccable suit was rumpled, his eyes wide with a frantic energy. In his trembling hand was a compact, black pistol, its suppressor a promise of silent violence. And it was pointed directly at Jae-sun's heart. I'm sorry, Hyung, Minute-jun said, his voice shaking. But this has gone too far. Abigail's world tilted on its axis once more. Jae-sun didn't move toward a weapon or cover. He simply stood, his body a subtle, unconscious barrier between the gun and her. Put it down, Minute-jun, Jae-sun said, his tone weary, as if this were a familiar, tedious tragedy. I can't. Minute-jun stepped out, the gun unwavering. His eyes flicked to Abigail, filled with a desperate, apologetic anguish. The prosecutor. She didn't find us on her own. Someone gave them the backdoor codes to the main server farm. Last night. He swallowed hard, the gun trembling. Abigail gave them the codes. They traced a data packet from her phone to a dead drop in Hongdae at midnight. He looked at her, grief-stricken. She's the one who sold us out. She's been working with them for months. The accusation landed like a physical blow. That's not, Abigail began, her mind racing. Last night, midnight, she'd been home, reviewing security protocols Jae-sun himself had asked her to. I know. Jae-sun's quiet confession sucked all the sound from the room. Minute-jun's gun hand faltered. What? I know she gave them the codes, Jae-sun repeated, and now his voice held a terrible, gentle finality. Because I'm the one who told her to. The silence in the penthouse was no longer tense. It was dead. A vacuum where Minute-jun's world visibly crumbled, and Abigail's mind screamed in silent, furious vertigo. You, what? Minute-jun breathed, the gun now dangling forgotten at his side. Jae-sun didn't look at his brother. His gaze was fixed on Abigail, reading the storm of betrayal and confusion in her eyes. The codes she delivered were dummy keys, he explained, his voice the calm center of the hurricane. They led to a mirrored server I built 3 months ago. And right now, that server is feeding every encrypted communique you've had with Director Kwon of the Gyumho Group straight into Prosecutor Kang's evidence bank. Minute-jun's face bleached of all color. No, the merger. It was just business. You've been plotting to broker your own deal, to cut me out and align with Kwon since January. Jae-sun interrupted, the weariness replaced by a glacial, judicial tone. You thought you were using Abigail to expose me, to make me vulnerable. You were just the courier for your own indictment. The pistol clattered to the marble floor. The sound was like a lock snapping shut. Minute-jun stumbled back against the elevator wall, a broken marionette. But Abigail wasn't watching him. She was staring at Jae-sun, the last 6 months rewinding and playing back in stark, horrifying clarity. The late-night requests for specific, encrypted files. The routine security test that required her phone's location data. The USB drive he'd asked her to drop in Hongdae, a backup for our partners in Busan, he'd said. He hadn't just used her as a shield. He'd used her as the weapon. You played me, she whispered. The taste of the words was bitter, metallic. You choreographed my betrayal. Jae-sun finally turned his full attention to her, and the raw, unvarnished truth in his expression was more shocking than any lie. I protected you, he corrected, his voice softening in a way that felt more dangerous than any shout. There's a difference. By making me look like a traitor to everyone. By making sure that when the National Police Agency storms this building in approximately, he glanced at his watch, a flick of his wrist, 7 minutes, you will have documented proof, from their own system, that you were acting under duress as a confidential informant. Minute-jun was the target. You were the instrument. The law loves a tidy narrative. Abigail's legs felt unsteady. A hysterical laugh bubbled in her throat, sharp and brittle. You're unbelievable. I'm pragmatic, he countered, and a ghost of something that might have been humor touched his eyes. This cleans the board. Minute-jun's ambition is neutralized. Your position is secured. Minute-jun was slumped, muttering to himself, but Abigail's attention snagged on Jae-sun's faint, satisfied expression. Not triumph. Something darker, more possessive. A look that said he enjoyed her fury because it meant she was engaged, that she cared enough to be furious. And that's when the final, chilling piece slid into place. No, she said, her voice dropping low and cold. The sound made Jae-sun's eyes narrow with fresh alertness. You're not pragmatic. You're a chess player who thinks 10 moves ahead. You wanted me to find that ledger. You wanted me angry, confrontational, right here, right now. She took a deliberate step back, carving out space she desperately needed. With Minute-jun listening. You needed a witness to my loyalty, to my rage on your behalf. Proof I was on your side when the real scandal broke. Jae-sun's expression didn't change, but she saw the minute tensing of his jaw. Confirmation. You needed me perfectly positioned for whatever comes next. She breathed, the scope of his design dawning on her with terrifying clarity. A slow, deliberate smile touched her lips then, one that didn't reach her stormy eyes. She reached up, her movements graceful and sure, and unpinned the antique jade hair clip holding back her dark curls. It was a piece he'd once complimented. But here's what your brilliant, pragmatic mind didn't account for, Jae-sun, she said, her thumb finding the almost imperceptible seam on the clip's underside. She pressed it. A tiny lead, hidden within the carved stone, winked once with a red light. While you were busy playing king and protecting your pawn, Abigail said, her voice now carrying the absolute, quiet authority that had always made her his most effective lieutenant, I was playing the market. Somewhere deep in the building's infrastructure, in servers Jae-sun didn't know she could access, a silent command executed. A digital skeleton key, forged over 4 years of watching him, began to turn. I didn't give the prosecutor dummy codes to a mirror server, she said, her smile sharp enough to draw blood. I gave her the master keys to your actual offshore vaults in Zurich and Singapore. And while you were so busy watching your brother and architecting my role as your victim. She let the pause hang, savoring the first flicker of genuine uncertainty in his dark eyes. I emptied every single one of them. The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight pressing down on the penthouse. The hum of the city below seemed to cease. Even Minutjan's ragged breathing hitched. Jason stood perfectly motionless. The satisfaction, the possessive gleam, all of it was wiped clean from his face, replaced by a stark, calculating blankness. His eyes, fixed on Abigail, were the flat, dark surface of a deep lake. "How much?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried through the room with the sharpness of a cracking whip. Abigail met his gaze without flinching, the jade hair clip cool and potent in her hand. All of it. 43 million in cryptocurrency, routed through 6 mixing services. Another 28 in bearer bonds, digitally voided and reissued. The 12 shell corporations you thought were impenetrable, dissolved. Their assets liquidated. She took a step forward, reclaiming the space she'd taken. "I've been moving your money for 4 years, Jason. Did you truly believe I didn't memorize where the real treasures were buried?" 3 heartbeats, a small eternity in that room. Nobody moved. Abigail braced for the eruption, for the violent fury of a king whose kingdom had just vanished from his ledger. Then, Park Jae-sun laughed. It started as a low, disbelieving huff of air. Then it built, a rich, deep, and utterly genuine sound that rolled through the penthouse, bouncing off the marble and glass. He laughed like a man who had just seen an impossible magic trick, like he'd been handed the punchline to a joke he'd been telling himself for years. Minutjan stared at his brother as if he'd grown a second head. "Hyung? She stole everything." "I know," Jae-sun said, and he was still laughing, his eyes crinkling at the corners, his gaze locked on Abigail with a blazing, terrifying admiration. "I know she did." He moved toward her then, not with the predatory stalk from before, but with something that looked like profound, unsettling relief. He stopped a breath away, so close she could see the faint scar through his eyebrow, the gold flecks in the dark brown of his irises. "I embedded a tracker in the currency itself," he said, his voice dropping to an intimate, confessional murmur. "At the blockchain protocol level. A dormant signal, waiting for the assets to move. Every coin you transferred, every bond you reissued. They've been pinging a satellite network I own for the last 4 minutes." Abigail's triumphant expression froze, then slowly fractured. The cold certainty in her gut thawed into a trickle of dread. "You're lying." "I'm really not." His hand came up, slow and deliberate. He didn't touch her face this time. Instead, his fingers traced the air beside her temple, following the path of a curl that had escaped. "I knew you'd take the money. I was counting on it. Because you're brilliant and ruthless, and you learned from the best." He leaned in, his words a warm brush against her ear. "You were the only one good enough to find it, and bold enough to steal it." Abigail's mind reeled, the ground shifting beneath her once more. "Then why let me?" she breathed, the fight leaching from her voice, replaced by pure, exhausted confusion. Jae-sun's thumb finally made contact, a featherlight stroke along her jawline. A touch so gentle it felt like a betrayal of his entire being. "Because the money was always yours. I just needed you to steal it." He paused, his dark eyes holding hers captive. "So I'd have a reason to chase you." Outside, the first sirens began to wail in the distance, a rising chorus. The federal raid. The climax of his orchestrated collapse. "You wanted a date tonight, Abigail." Jae-sun's other hand came up, cradling the side of her neck, his touch achingly careful. "You have one. With me. On a plane to a country with no extradition treaty and a villa that has no record of ever being owned by Park Jae-sun." "You're insane," she whispered, but she didn't pull away. Her body was traitorously still, leaning into the warmth of his palm. "I'm finished," he corrected. "I needed to burn this empire to the ground. You needed to believe you'd outplayed me. We both got what we wanted." He was offering her the world he'd just burned down. A world of nothing, together. Minute-Jun made a gagging sound of disgust from the elevator. "This is a sickness. You're both sick." "Probably," Jae-sun agreed, his eyes never leaving Abigail's. "But it's the only cure I want." He finally addressed his brother, his tone shifting to one of cool, final authority. "You'll take the deal Prosecutor Kang offers. You'll testify against Director Kwon and the Gyumho Group. You'll serve 18 months in a white-collar facility. Then you'll walk away." "And if I don't?" Minute-Jun spat, though the defiance was weak. Jae-sun's gaze flicked to him, cold and absolute. "Then the evidence I just fed her includes the location of the body from the docks last spring. The one you thought I never knew about." He looked back at Abigail, the cold melting into something infinitely more complex. "He's my brother. I'm not a monster." Abigail's laugh was a broken thing. "You're something." Jae-sun's smile was slow, devastating, and utterly sincere. "I'm yours," he said, "if you'll have me." The sirens were a rising tsunami of sound now, clawing up from the streets. Blue and red lights painted the penthouse windows in frantic strokes. They had minutes, maybe seconds. Jae-sun's offer hung in the charged air, not a plea, but a stark, final proposition. "I'm yours, if you'll have me." The empire was ash. The money was a phantom with a tracking beacon. All that remained was the raw, terrifying truth between them. Abigail should have run. Not toward him, but away, into the chaos of the raiding police, into the identity he'd built for her, into a life of pristine, lonely safety. Instead, she found herself studying his face as if seeing it for the first time. The sharp, elegant lines were etched with a bone-deep exhaustion no amount of power could mask. The Hwacha tattoo on his neck wasn't a mark of menace in this light. It was a battle scar, a story of survival. He had orchestrated the unthinkable, immolating his own kingdom, and his only demand was her company in the wilderness. "You orchestrated your own downfall," she said, her voice hushed with disbelief. "Just to, what? Prove a point? To force my hand." "To level the field," he corrected, his hand still framing her face, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones with a reverence that unraveled her. "No more boss. No more assistant. No more 3 feet of professional distance. Just 2 people who are too sharp and too damaged and too aware of the cost of everything, standing in the rubble with nothing left to lose but each other." Behind them, Minute-Jun pushed himself off the elevator wall, his face a mask of bitter resignation. "The police are in the lobby. They'll be on this floor in 2 minutes." Jae-sun didn't turn. "The service elevator to the roof. The codes are still clean." "And what about me?" Minute-Jun's voice cracked. "You stay," Jae-sun said, finally looking at his brother. There was no malice in his gaze, only a grim, familial finality. "You tell them I forced Abigail to cooperate at gunpoint. That you tried to stop me. That I fled to the roof. You'll be a hero. It will shave years off your sentence." Minute-Jun stared, understanding dawning. This, too, was part of the design. His redemption was woven into Jae-sun's ruin. He gave a curt, pained nod, the last transaction between them. The sound of heavy boots and shouted commands echoed from the main stairwell door. Time was up. Jae-sun's hand slid from Abigail's face to clasp hers. His grip was firm, sure, but his palm was warm, not the cold marble she always imagined. "Now," he said. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. He pulled her toward a panel in the wood-paneled wall, hidden beside a bookshelf. A keypad glowed under his touch. The panel slid open, revealing a dim, concrete stairwell leading up. The last thing Abigail saw before the door hissed shut behind them was Minute-Jun squaring his shoulders, facing the blinding flashlights now bursting through the penthouse entrance, beginning his performance. Then, there was only the hollow echo of their footsteps on the narrow stairs, the smell of dust and concrete, and the overwhelming heat of Jason's hand in hers as they climbed toward the sky. The rooftop wind was a physical assault, a roaring, ice-cold beast that tore at Abigail's silk blouse and whipped her hair into a wild, dark cloud. The Seoul skyline surrounded them, a glittering cage of glass and ambition they were now abandoning. 30 feet away, a black, unmarked helicopter waited, its rotors already spinning a furious circle, slicing through the neon haze. It looked less like transportation and more like a mechanical dragon, a creature of pure, sleek escape. Jae-sun kept her hand locked in his as they ran, his body angled against the wind to shield her. His grip was possessive, but not confining. It was an anchor in the chaos. They reached the helicopter and he yanked the door open, ushering her into the leather-clad interior. He followed, pulling the door shut with a solid thunk that muted the world to a deep, vibrating thrum. Inside, it was a cocoon of muted luxury and controlled panic. Jae-sun leaned across her, his body pressing close for a moment as he secured her harness. The scent of him, cedar, smoke, and the sharp, clean sweat of the night's crescendo, was everywhere. "You thought of everything," she said again, her voice barely audible over the engine's whine. He settled into the seat beside her, his profile etched against the city lights as the helicopter lifted off with a stomach-dropping lurch. "Not everything," he repeated, his earlier confession. He turned to look at her, his eyes black in the dim cabin light. "I didn't plan on the fear." "You? Afraid?" The notion was absurd. "Terrified," he admitted, the word raw and unvarnished. "Because the strategy is over, Abigail. The exit plan is executed. The chessboard is gone. All that's left is this." He gestured between them, at the tiny, fragile space in the roaring machine. "This is real. And I have no blueprint for real." The helicopter banked sharply, turning east, away from the glowing cluster of the Gangnam district where his empire was now being ransacked. Through the window, Abigail watched his world, their world, shrink into a diorama of light and consequence. She had just committed the ultimate betrayal, and he had thanked her for it with a laugh. She had stolen a fortune, and he had planted a beacon in it to follow her. She was on the run with a man who was equal parts salvation and damnation, and the only thing she knew for certain was that the 3 feet between them were finally, irrevocably, gone. Jae-sun's hand found hers again in the space between their seats. His thumb traced a slow, endless circle on her palm, a silent, desperate prayer. "For what it's worth," he said, his voice barely a whisper against the rotor's roar, "I think you look like a queen when you're burning down a kingdom." Despite the terror, the uncertainty, the sheer madness of it all, Abigail felt a real smile break through. Born from a well of defiance she thought his games had drained. "You're impossible." "I'm committed," he corrected, and for the first time that night, his smile reached his eyes. "There's a difference." Below them, Seoul became a memory. Ahead, there was only the dark expanse of the sea and a future written in smoke. His hand in hers was the only contract that mattered. The sea below was a black mirror, fractured by the helicopter's navigation lights. Korea was a smudge of light on the horizon, then nothing. The roar of the blades was a constant, vibrating hum that matched the thrum in Abigail's veins. They sat in the plush silence of the cabin, the adrenaline of escape cooling into a heavy, tangible awareness. Jae-sun still held her hand, his thumb now still, his grip a steady, warm weight. He was staring out his window, his face a mask of contemplation in the reflection. The king in exile, surveying the void he'd chosen. "So," Abigail said, her voice sounding small against the engine. "Sao Paulo. Then Singapore." He turned from the window. "Then anywhere. The plane has long-range fuel. The destinations are suggestions. The choice is yours." "My choice." She tested the words. For 4 years, her choices had been illusions within the confines of his design. And if my choice is to walk away at the first airport? To take my exit strategy and vanish alone? Jason didn't flinch. Then you walk away. The tracker in the assets will lead me to you, but I won't stop you. I'll just know where you are. He paused, his gaze unwavering. Knowing you're somewhere in the world, alive and thriving on the fortune I built for you, it would be a kind of peace. A painful one, but peace nonetheless. It was the least manipulative thing he could have said, and therefore the most disarming. He was offering her everything, including the freedom to reject him. You burned it all down for a possibility, she murmured, shaking her head. I burned it down because it was a cage, he countered, his voice gaining intensity. For both of us. You were my most lethal weapon, Abigail, and I had to keep you holstered at my side, in sight, under control. The tension, that violin string, it wasn't just professional. It was the strain of keeping what I wanted most at a precise, safe distance. It was exhausting. He released her hand, only to reach up and gently turn her face toward him. The cabin lights cast deep shadows, making him look both older and strangely young. The money, the tracker, the fake date, Minute-Jun's betrayal, it was all scaffolding. Necessary demolition to clear the ground. So we could stand on it together. Or not. But at least honestly. Abigail searched his eyes, looking for the lie, the final layer of the game. She saw only fatigue, a stark vulnerability, and a frighteningly clear resolve. You're asking for trust. After a masterpiece of manipulation. I'm not asking for anything, he said softly. I'm stating my intention. I am here. The rest is calculus. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, polite and neutral. ETA to the Sea Star is 15 minutes, sir. Jason acknowledged with a tap on his headset, his eyes never leaving hers. The yacht is stocked, crewed by 4 people who know only that they work for a holding company. They've never seen me. We'll be at sea for 3 days before we make port for the jet. Plenty of time. Time for what? To see if we can breathe without the roles we were playing. He leaned back, putting a few inches of charged space between them. To see if Abigail and Jason exist without Park Jason and his most trusted lieutenant. The helicopter began its descent. Below, the dark water was broken by the sleek, white expanse of a megayacht, its decks glowing with soft, golden light. It looked like a fallen star adrift in the darkness. As they landed on the helipad with a gentle bump, the reality of it all crashed over her. The pristine escape vessel, the endless sea, the man beside her who had rewritten both their lives with a ruthless, romantic ferocity. It was insane. It was sublime. The cabin door opened, and the salt-tinged ocean air rushed in, clean and sharp, scouring away the last vestiges of sandalwood incense and gun smoke. A uniformed crew member stood at a respectful distance, head bowed. Jason exited first, then turned and offered her his hand. Not to help her down, but as a gesture. A question mark made flesh. Abigail looked at his outstretched hand, then at the vast, unknown sea around them, then back at his face. The wind tousled his dark hair, and for a moment, he wasn't a mafia boss or a strategic genius. He was just a man, waiting. She placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, not with triumph, but with a profound, grounding certainty. He led her off the helipad, onto the deck of the yacht. The crew member melted away. Welcome, Jason said, his voice almost lost in the wind and waves, to the first night of the rest of nothing. They stood at the railing, looking back at the receding speck of the helicopter against the moonlit sky. The last tether to their old life, gone. Abigail finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest since the penthouse. The tracker in the money. If I'd just kept it dormant, never taken it, what was your endgame then? Jason was silent for a long moment. Then the money would have sat there, clean and untouchable, your permanent safety net. And I would have stayed in Seoul, playing the king in a crown of thorns, watching you from 3 feet away until one of us died of old age or a bullet." He glanced at her, a sad, wry twist to his mouth. "A different kind of hell. This one has hope." He was laying himself bare, piece by terrifying piece, showing her the machinery of his heart, and it was the most daring, reckless thing he'd ever done. Abigail turned to face him, the ocean wind whipping her hair across her face. "No more games, Jason. No more hidden layers. No more contingency plans you don't tell me about." He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw no shadow of calculation behind his eyes. Only a clear, unwavering focus. "No more games. The only plan is the one we make together. Starting now." He raised her hand, still clasped in his, and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The kiss was not a brand of ownership, but a seal, a promise whispered against her skin, drowned out by the endless sea. Somewhere ahead, across the dark water, was a continent, a new identity, a life unwritten. Behind them, an empire was ashes. And here, on this tiny, floating world, there was only the truth, finally spoken, and the terrifying, exhilarating freedom of what came next. The master suite of the Sea Star was a study in silent luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows held back the infinite dark of the ocean. No city hum, no sirens, no echoes of past lives. Just the deep, rhythmic sigh of the sea against the hull. Abigail stood in the center of the room, feeling untethered. The sapphire silk of her dress was a relic from a different universe. Jason had disappeared into the adjoining cabin, giving her space, another new, disorienting currency. On the bed, she found a simple set of clothes, black linen trousers, a soft white shirt. Her size, no tags. Next to them, a new tablet, sleek and blank. She powered it on. A single folder, Valdez Trust. Inside, the full, breathtaking scope of the fortune he'd built for her. And beside the financials, a new document. A fuller backstopped passport for an Abigail Vale, citizenship pending. The photo was recent, one she didn't remember taking. He'd thought of everything, even the alias she might choose. She changed, the fine linen feeling alien against her skin. When she emerged onto the private aft deck, he was already there. He'd shed his suit jacket and tie, his shirt sleeves rolled up. The Huacha tattoo was fully visible, a dark, intricate story on his forearm. He held 2 glasses of amber liquid, offering one to her. "It's quiet," she said, taking the glass. Their fingers didn't brush. "Deafening," he agreed, staring out at the water. He took a sip. "I've orchestrated every second of my life since I was 16. The silence of no agenda. It's louder than a gunshot." They stood side by side, not touching, the only sound the wind and the waves. The tension between them had transformed. It wasn't the taut, humming string of the penthouse. It was something wider, deeper, a canyon of unknown depth they now had to cross. "What do we do now?" Abigail asked, voicing the terrifying question they both felt. "We wait," Jason said softly. "We breathe. We see what remains when the dust settles." He finally looked at her. "We learn how to talk without a subtext of corporate espionage or imminent death." A faint, genuine smile touched her lips. "I'm not sure we know how. Then we learn." He set his glass down and leaned against the railing, facing her fully. First lesson. A question with no strategic purpose. What did you want to be? Before Park Global. Before me. The question was so simple it disarmed her. For 4 years, their conversations had been data points and directives. This was a key to a room she'd locked long ago. An architect, she heard herself say. I wanted to build things that lasted, that created space for light, for life. The admission felt painfully naive and unbearably true. Jason didn't smile, didn't mock. He absorbed it. You still can. The Valdez Trust could build 100 studios. It's blood money, she said flatly, though the bitterness was gone. It was just a fact. It's survival money, he corrected gently. Mine. Yours. Now, perhaps, ours. What we build with it next, that can be clean. That can have light. He was offering redemption, not just escape. A future, not just a hiding place. Your turn, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. A question with no purpose. He was silent for a long moment, his eyes tracing the horizon. Do you believe, he began, choosing his words with a care she'd never heard, that a man who has built a world on control can learn to simply hold without grasping? Her breath caught. It was the most vulnerable thing he'd ever said. It wasn't about power or plans. It was about fear. His. She didn't answer with words. Slowly, giving him every chance to retreat, she closed the space between them. She took his left hand, the one resting on the railing. She turned it over, exposing the palm. With her other hand, she placed her glass in his. Hold this, she said. His fingers closed instinctively around the crystal, his brow furrowed in confusion. Don't move it. Don't analyze its contents. Don't plan its use. She placed her own hand over his, surrounding his fist with hers. Just feel its weight, its temperature, the way the sea air cools the glass. Jason stood utterly still, his entire world reduced to the sensation of a glass in his hand and her hand on his. The constant, whirring engine of his mind, for the first time in memory, had no input, no strategy to compute. There was only the feeling. His eyes widened, then slowly, drifted shut. A long, shuddering breath escaped him. Abigail watched the armor fall. Not in a dramatic crash, but in a silent, gentle surrender. The lines of tension on his face softened. The ruthless patriarch was gone. In his place was just a man, unmoored and terrified and, for this one moment, utterly peaceful. After an eternity, he opened his eyes. They were clear, dark, and filled with a wonder that made her heart clench. See, she whispered, you're holding it, and it hasn't broken, and the world hasn't ended. A sound escaped him, part sigh, part sob, part laugh. He carefully set the glass down. Then, with movements achingly slow and deliberate, he turned his hand and laced his fingers through hers. No, he murmured, his thumb stroking the back of her hand. It's just beginning. He didn't pull her closer. He didn't try to kiss her. He just held her hand, their joined hands resting on the railing between them, a simple, fragile bridge over the canyon. The yacht cut through the black water, carrying them toward an unseen dawn. Behind, the past was cinders. Ahead, a blank map. But here, on this deck, in the quiet heart of the first night of nothing, they had found their first truth. They didn't need an empire, a strategy, or a fortune to define them. They just needed this. The weight of a glass, the warmth of a hand, the courage to stand in the silence, together, and learn what came next. So, when did you know? Was it the cigarette lit in the silence? The laugh as his empire burned? Or the moment she taught him how to hold something without breaking it? If you're still breathing after that ending, you know this was never about the escape. It was about the collision. Subscribe. Because I live for the stories where love and destruction wear the same face. Now tell me, what country are you watching from? I want to know how far this kind of ruinous devotion can travel. Until next time.